September 13th, 1944, 0430 hours, Hill 265, west of Nancy, France. The Browning M1919A4 machine gun had been firing non-stop for 17 minutes when Private First Class James Robert McKinley suddenly heard the sound every machine gunner feared. The steady bark of .30 caliber bullets changed into a broken, uneven stutter, and then it stopped completely. In the darkness, lit only by tracer fire and exploding mortars, the 19-year-old farm boy from Iowa stared at 600 pounds of jammed steel that was supposed to protect his company from a German counterattack threatening to overrun their position. Through the early pre-dawn darkness, McKinley could hear German voices shouting orders less than 200 yards away. The 2nd Battalion, 26th Infantry Regiment, had taken this hilltop after 36 hours of continuous fighting, but now soldiers from the 15th Panzer Grenadier Division were trying to recapture it before American forces could strengthen their defenses. The platoon's other machine gun had been destroyed by a direct mortar hit 20 minutes earlier. McKinley's gun was now the only automatic fire stopping German infantry from reaching the American foxholes. His assistant gunner, Private Eddie Kowalski from Chicago, had been killed by the same artillery barrage that buried their gun in dirt and debris. His ammunition carrier had been wounded and evacuated. McKinley was alone with a weapon that had suddenly become a 400-pound paperweight at the exact moment that 600 German soldiers were advancing up the hill. What happened over the next 4 minutes would not only save McKinley's company, but also show how American training, high-quality equipment, and personal initiative could create soldiers who performed extraordinary acts under impossible pressure. The farm boy who had never seen a machine gun until 9 months earlier was about to use lessons he learned fixing tractors in Marshall County, Iowa, to solve a problem that military manuals said only an armorer could fix. James Robert McKinley's journey to Hill 265 began on March 7, 1925, on a 160-acre farm outside Marshalltown, Iowa. He was the second of 4 children born to Robert and Mary McKinley, and grew up during the Great Depression, learning early that survival meant making do with whatever tools and materials were available. The McKinley farm used equipment that was often decades old, held together through clever repairs and mechanical skill. By age 12, James was responsible for maintaining the farm's aging Farmall F20 tractor, a 1924 model that required constant attention and repair. The nearest mechanic was 14 miles away in Marshalltown, a journey the family could rarely afford during harvest season. Young James learned to diagnose problems by sound, to understand mechanical systems through touch and observation, and to solve problems with whatever tools were immediately available. His father, Robert McKinley, a veteran of the First World War who had served with the 42nd Rainbow Division in France, taught his son that machines were logical. They did what you told them if you understood their language. When something stopped working, it was because something had broken, something had shifted out of alignment, or something had gotten where it did not belong. Find that something, fix it, and the machine would work again. This mechanical philosophy would prove more valuable than any formal education. James attended Marshalltown High School through his junior year before dropping out in 1942 to help run the farm when his older brother enlisted in the Navy. He spent that year maintaining equipment that should have been replaced decades earlier, keeping the farm productive while his father aged and his younger siblings were too young for heavy work. The draft notice arrived April 15, 1943. James Robert McKinley, now 18 years old, was ordered to report to induction at Fort Dodge, Iowa. On May 3rd, basic training at Camp Walters, Texas, lasted 13 weeks. McKinley proved an excellent marksman, qualifying as expert with the M1 Garand rifle. But his real distinction came during weapons familiarization. During machine gun training in Week 7, the instructors demonstrated the Browning M1919A4, When the gun suddenly jammed during a demonstration, McKinley approached the instructor after the malfunction was cleared. "Sergeant, that jam happened because the buffer spring is worn. You can hear it bottoming out before the bolt finishes its travel. The recoil spring is also weak. That is why it is short-stroking on the return." Sergeant First Class Theodore Bronchi, a decorated veteran of Kasserine Pass in Sicily, stared at the Iowa farm boy. "How the hell do you know that?" "Sounds just like my dad's tractor when the valve springs got weak. Same rhythm, same failure pattern. The timing is off because worn springs cannot return the moving parts fast enough." Bronchi field-stripped the machine gun and discovered McKinley was correct. The instructor made a note in McKinley's training file. "Exceptional mechanical aptitude. Recommend for specialist training." But the note went nowhere. The Army needed riflemen for the European theater, and Private McKinley continued through the infantry pipeline. By December 1943, Private James Robert McKinley was ready for assignment to a combat unit. The journey to Europe began January 8, 1944. The crossing took 9 days through submarine-infested waters. McKinley spent most of the voyage below decks in compartments packed with hundreds of men, learning to sleep despite the constant noise and motion, adapting to the military culture of hurry up and wait. In early March, he received orders assigning him to the 26th Infantry Regiment, 1st Infantry Division, the Big Red One. At that moment, he was preparing for what would become the invasion of Normandy. McKinley joined the regiment at their training area near Dorchester on March 9, 1944. The 1st Infantry Division was a veteran formation that had fought in North Africa, Sicily, and Salerno. But by early 1944, casualties had depleted the division's experienced personnel. Replacements like McKinley filled ranks that would soon face the most ambitious amphibious operation in history. The 1st Infantry Division landed on Omaha Beach on June 6, 1944. McKinley's squad leader, Sergeant William Patterson, was killed by machine gun fire within minutes of landing. The squad's machine gunner, Corporal James Rodriguez, was wounded severely by artillery fragments as they reached the seawall. McKinley, the ammunition bearer with the least training on the weapon, suddenly found himself promoted to machine gunner by battlefield necessity. Under intense fire, McKinley and his new assistant gunner, Private Eddie Kowalski, from Chicago, dragged their Browning M1919A4 to a position behind a disabled Sherman tank. For the next 4 hours, they provided covering fire for infantry attempting to advance through the German defenses. McKinley fired over 3,000 rounds that day, changing barrels twice as they overheated. By nightfall, Company E had suffered 43% casualties, but they had gained the bluffs and pushed inland. McKinley had proven himself under fire. More importantly, he had developed an intimate understanding of his weapon's behavior under extreme conditions. He learned how it responded when hot, how it performed with different ammunition lots, and how to recognize the subtle sounds that indicated developing problems before they became critical malfunctions. The campaign through Normandy tested every soldier. McKinley's squad, now down to 4 men from its original 9, operated their machine gun constantly. McKinley became known for his ability to keep the weapon functioning even under the worst conditions. While other crews struggled with jams caused by mud, dust, and continuous firing, McKinley's gun rarely stopped. The attack on Nancy, France began September 5, 1944. The city, a key communications and transportation hub, had been fortified by German forces determined to delay the American advance. Hill 265, a relatively small elevation west of Nancy, held strategic importance because it overlooked the approaches to the city and provided observation over several miles of the surrounding countryside. The attack began September 11th with an artillery preparation that lasted 30 minutes. At 600 hours, 2nd Battalion, 26th Infantry began their assault. For the next 6 hours, the battle devolved into close-range fighting. By 1600 hours, American forces had gained the crest of Hill 265, but faced immediate German counterattacks. The third counterattack, the one that would test McKinley beyond anything he had experienced, began with an artillery barrage at 0300 hours on September 13, 1944. For 20 minutes, German 105mm and 150mm howitzers hammered the hilltop. McKinley's machine gun position took a direct hit from an airburst round that killed his assistant gunner instantly and buried the weapon in debris. McKinley, protected by the pit's depth, survived with only minor cuts. As he dug himself out, he could hear German voices in the darkness below the hill. Company E's other machine gun had been destroyed completely. McKinley's weapon was now the only automatic fire stopping German infantry from reaching the American foxholes. He pressed the trigger again. Nothing. The firing pin was falling. He could hear the click, but no round was firing. He cleared the weapon completely, removing the belt and locking the bolt to the rear. Using a small flashlight covered with red cellophane, he examined the chamber. Empty. He inspected the feed mechanism, the bolt, the extractor. Everything looked normal, but when he tried to manually cycle around from the belt into the chamber, the bolt would not pick up the cartridge properly. This was not a simple malfunction. This was a mechanical failure that training manuals said required an armorer to diagnose and repair. Standard procedure called for McKinley to abandon the weapon and fight as a rifleman until it could be repaired. But there was no time for standard procedures. German infantry were advancing up the hill at that moment. McKinley did something that was either brilliant or insane. Instead of following procedures, he relied on the mechanical intuition developed over thousands of hours maintaining farm equipment. He stopped thinking of the Browning as a military weapon and started thinking of it as a machine, a collection of moving parts that followed mechanical principles. He removed the top cover completely and set it aside. Using his flashlight and his fingers, he traced the path a cartridge should follow from the belt into the chamber. The feed mechanism should lift the round from the belt, position it in front of the bolt face. Then the bolt should strip it from the feed mechanism and drive it into the chamber. But something in that sequence was failing. He cycled the bolt manually, slowly, watching how the parts moved. The bolt would travel forward, contact the cartridge, but instead of smoothly driving it into the chamber, it would stop short. The cartridge remained at an angle, caught between the bolt face and the chamber. He examined the bolt face closely with his flashlight. There, barely visible, was a small piece of metal, a fragment from the artillery shell that had nearly killed him, wedged into the ejector slot on the bolt face. The fragment, no larger than a grain of rice, was preventing the bolt from seating completely against the cartridge base. When the firing pin fell, it was striking the primer off-center through the metal fragment, not with enough force to ignite the primer. The solution was simple in theory: remove the fragment. But the fragment was wedged tight in a space designed with tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch. McKinley used his pocket knife, a simple two-blade folder his father had given him when he turned 12. He opened the smaller blade and used its point to work the metal fragment loose. The work required steady hands, despite the darkness, the sound of approaching Germans, and the knowledge that mortar rounds could land on his position at any moment. After 90 seconds that felt like 90 minutes, the fragment came free. He cycled the bolt manually again, feeding around from the belt. This time the cartridge seated smoothly into the chamber. The bolt closed completely. He replaced the top cover, loaded a fresh belt, charged the weapon, aimed into the darkness toward the sound of German voices, and pressed the trigger. The Browning roared back to life. 30 caliber rounds streamed downhill at 500 rounds per minute, red tracers marking their path through the pre-dawn darkness. McKinley traversed the weapon left and right, walking fire across the hillside where German infantry had been forming up for their assault. The effect was immediate and devastating. The German attack, which had been gathering momentum, broke apart under the unexpected automatic fire. Soldiers who moments before had been advancing confidently suddenly found themselves in a killing zone.
They scattered, seeking cover. The assault lost cohesion before it properly began. McKinley continued firing, short bursts aimed at muzzle flashes and movement, conserving ammunition but maintaining pressure. The platoon commander, First Lieutenant Robert Harrison, later reported that McKinley's machine gun single-handedly broke the German counterattack. The enemy force, estimated at battalion strength, 500 to 600 men, had expected to find American positions disrupted after the artillery barrage. Instead, they met concentrated automatic weapons fire that inflicted heavy casualties and forced them to withdraw. As dawn broke at 05:30 hours, American observers counted over 100 German bodies on the hillside below Company S positions. Dozens more wounded had been dragged away during the withdrawal. Prisoner interrogations later revealed that the attacking force had suffered 38% casualties and been rendered combat ineffective. They would not attack again. McKinley's action had saved more than just his immediate platoon. Hill 265 anchored the entire battalion defensive line. If the hill had fallen, German forces would have achieved a salient into American positions that could have threatened the entire regiment's advance on Nancy. The city, which fell to American forces on September 15, 1944, might have required additional weeks to capture if German forces had successfully recaptured Hill 265. First Lieutenant Harrison recommended McKinley for the Silver Star, the third highest decoration for valor. The citation, approved 6 weeks later, read, "Private First Class James Robert McKinley distinguished himself by gallantry and action on 13 September 1944 near Nancy, France, when his machine gun malfunctioned during a critical enemy counterattack. Private First Class McKinley, working alone and under intense enemy fire, diagnosed and repaired a complex mechanical failure using only a pocket knife. His initiative and mechanical skill restored his weapon to action at the precise moment when its fire was most desperately needed, breaking an enemy attack that threatened to overrun his company's position. His actions reflect great credit upon himself, his unit, and the United States Army." As daylight fully illuminated Hill 265, McKinley sat beside his machine gun, exhausted, and waited for the armorer to arrive. When Sergeant Technical Grade 4 Leonard Washington reached the position at 0800 hours, McKinley explained what had happened and showed him the metal fragment that had caused the malfunction. Washington, an experienced armorer who had been maintaining weapons since North Africa, examined the Browning carefully. "You fixed a dead-lined weapon with a pocket knife in the middle of a firefight. They do not teach that at ordnance school. Most soldiers would have given up and used their rifle. You understood the weapon well enough to diagnose the problem and solve it with whatever tool you had available. That is not just luck, that is skill." Washington filed a detailed report on the incident. The report reached not just division level, but was forwarded to the Ordnance Department for review. The case study of a soldier successfully field repairing a complex malfunction under combat conditions provided valuable data for future training programs and maintenance procedures. The Browning M1919A4 that McKinley repaired that morning had been manufactured in 1942 at the Colt Patent Firearms Manufacturing Company in Hartford, Connecticut. The weapon's development history traced back to 1919, when Browning successfully adapted his earlier water-cooled M1917 design into an air-cooled weapon. The M1919A4 variant, adopted in 1936, incorporated several improvements. It featured a lighter barrel that could be changed more quickly, an improved bolt design that enhanced reliability, a better feeding mechanism that reduced malfunctions, and simplified maintenance procedures that allowed field-level repair of most common failures. The weapon fired the standard .30-06 Springfield cartridge, the same ammunition used by the M1 Garand rifle. It operated on a short recoil principle, using the energy from firing to cycle the action. The rate of fire, approximately 400 to 600 rounds per minute, represented a balance between sustained fire and barrel life. The industrial effort to produce these weapons revealed American manufacturing capacity. Colt Patent Firearms Manufacturing Company produced approximately 12,000 M1919A4 guns during the war. The Buffalo Arms Corporation manufactured another 18,000. The Saginaw Steering Gear Division of General Motors produced 11,000. Ammunition production dwarfed weapon manufacturing. The Lake City Army Ammunition Plant in Missouri alone produced over 4.7 billion rounds of small arms ammunition during the war, including billions of .30-06 rounds. This single plant employed over 20,000 workers, predominantly women, who manufactured ammunition around the clock in 3 shifts. This industrial excellence created the reliability that soldiers like McKinley depended on. The Browning M1919A4 had a reputation for extraordinary durability. It could fire thousands of rounds without cleaning, operate in extreme temperatures, function after being buried in mud or submerged in water, and continue operating even when damaged. Before we continue with how this incident influenced military training, if you are enjoying this deep dive into an individual's impact on history, do not forget to subscribe to the channel. These stories matter because they show how ordinary people rose to extraordinary circumstances. Hit that subscribe button so you never miss another incredible story of courage and innovation from history. The Army's training program for machine gunners had evolved substantially during the war. Early training focused exclusively on employment. By 1944, experience had shown this approach was inadequate. Combat created weapon failures faster than armorers could repair them. The training program was revised to emphasize mechanical understanding. The new curriculum taught soldiers not just how to operate weapons, but how they worked. Students learned the function of each component, how parts interacted, what could go wrong, and why. They practiced field repairs using improvised tools. They diagnosed malfunctions by observing weapon behavior. The goal was creating soldiers who understood their weapons mechanically, not just operationally. McKinley's farm background had given him exactly this kind of mechanical intuition. Growing up maintaining aging equipment with minimal resources had trained him to diagnose problems, improvise solutions, and understand mechanical systems at a fundamental level. The Army had refined these skills through training, but the foundation was laid years earlier in Iowa fields. His action on Hill 265 represented a pattern that American forces demonstrated repeatedly. Individual soldiers, often from rural backgrounds with mechanical experience, would solve critical problems through initiative and improvisation. These small acts of ingenuity, multiplied across thousands of similar incidents, contributed to American tactical success as much as superior firepower or logistics. The German military, despite its tactical excellence, struggled with this kind of adaptive initiative. German training emphasized precision and adherence to doctrine. Soldiers learned to execute procedures exactly as taught, which worked well when circumstances matched training, but created problems when reality diverged from expectation. This difference reflected deeper cultural distinctions. The American military, drawing from a diverse population with varied backgrounds, necessarily relied more on individual initiative. Training could be standardized only to a point. Beyond that, the Army depended on soldiers applying common sense and personal experience. This approach proved more adaptable to the chaos of combat. McKinley himself continued serving with Company E through the fall and winter of 1944. The 1st Infantry Division participated in the Battle of Aachen in October. In December, they faced the German Ardennes offensive, the Battle of the Bulge. During the desperate fighting around Butgenbach, McKinley's machine gun again proved critical. His squad helped defend against repeated attacks, firing over 15,000 rounds during 3 days of continuous combat. By February 1945, McKinley had been promoted to sergeant and given command of a machine gun section, 2 guns and 8 men. He trained his crews in the same mechanical understanding that had saved his life on Hill 265. He taught his men to listen to their weapons,
to recognize subtle changes that indicated developing problems, to understand the machines well enough to keep them running under any circumstances. The war in Europe ended May 8, 1945. Sergeant McKinley, now 20 years old, had survived 11 months of continuous combat. The official casualty statistics for Company E told a stark story. Between June 6, 1944 and May 8, 1945, the company suffered 314 casualties from an authorized strength of 193 men. This meant the company had been replaced more than 1.5 times. McKinley was one of 17 soldiers who had served continuously from Normandy to Germany. The Silver Star he received recognized not superhuman heroism, but intelligent initiative applied under pressure. McKinley had not charged machine gun nests or single-handedly destroyed enemy tanks. He had simply refused to accept that his weapon was inoperable, applied mechanical knowledge to solve a problem, and restored his gun to action when it was desperately needed. This pattern, repeated thousands of times across hundreds of battlefields, contributed to American victory as much as strategic decisions or technological advantages. The cumulative effect of individual soldiers solving problems, maintaining equipment, and adapting to circumstances created tactical advantages that overwhelmed enemies who often possessed superior training or equipment. After the war's end, Sergeant James Robert McKinley returned to Marshalltown, Iowa in September 1945. He was discharged at Fort McCoy, Wisconsin on September 23rd. He did not return to farming. He used GI Bill benefits to attend Iowa State University, studying mechanical engineering. He graduated in 1949 and took a position with John Deere in Waterloo, Iowa, working on tractor design and agricultural equipment development. His military experience influenced his engineering career profoundly. He emphasized reliability over innovation. Believing that equipment needed to work consistently under adverse conditions, he designed maintenance procedures that soldiers could have followed, assuming minimal tools and training. He believed machines should be comprehensible to their operators, not mysterious black boxes that only specialists could repair. McKinley rarely spoke about his combat experiences. Like many veterans of his generation, he considered the war something to be survived and then left behind. His children knew he had served in Europe, knew he had been decorated for valor, but learned few details. In 1976, a writer researching 1st Infantry Division history interviewed McKinley about Hill 265. McKinley, then 51 years old, eventually agreed. The interview revealed his perspective on what had happened 32 years earlier. "I did not do anything special that night. The gun was broken and I fixed it. That is what you do when equipment breaks down. You figure out what is wrong and you fix it. My father taught me that when I was 12 years old working on our tractor. The Army taught me how the Browning worked. I just combined what I already knew with what I had learned and solved the problem." When asked about courage, McKinley responded, "I was not thinking about courage. I was thinking that if I could not fix the gun, a lot of people were going to die, probably including me. Fear makes you focus very clearly on what needs to be done. I was scared, but I was also concentrating on the mechanical problem. My hands were steady because I understood what I was doing." James Robert McKinley died February 14, 2006, at age 81. His obituary mentioned his military service briefly. Veteran of World War II, served with 1st Infantry Division in Europe, awarded Silver Star for gallantry in action. To his neighbors and colleagues, he was Jim McKinley, a retired engineer who had lived a productive life. But to military historians studying small unit actions and individual initiative in combat, McKinley represented something significant. His story illustrated how American military effectiveness resulted not just from superior resources, but from the quality of individual soldiers. The emphasis on mechanical understanding, the encouragement of initiative, the assumption that soldiers would solve problems creatively. These approaches created forces that could adapt and overcome challenges. The broader lessons from McKinley's experience remain relevant. First, mechanical understanding matters. Soldiers who comprehend their equipment can maintain and repair it when procedural knowledge alone fails. Second, prior experience provides unexpected advantages. McKinley's farm background gave him mechanical intuition more valuable than additional military training. Third, initiative must be encouraged. McKinley made a decision to attempt a repair that doctrine said was impossible. This judgment call, made under extreme pressure by a 19-year-old private first class, proved correct. Fourth, small actions can have large consequences. Removing a tiny metal fragment took 90 seconds, but prevented a German breakthrough that could have affected an entire operation. Leadership at all levels should recognize that individual actions by junior personnel can influence outcomes far beyond their immediate situations. The machine gun that McKinley repaired on Hill 265 continued in service until March 1945, when it was finally deadlined for barrel wear after firing over 60,000 rounds. The gun, Colt serial number 473298, still exists in a military museum collection, its service record attached, including a note about the field repair in September 1944. The hill itself, now simply another low elevation in the countryside west of Nancy, bears no markers. Local French residents know little of the battle fought there. Nature has erased the evidence of combat that once made this location important enough that hundreds of men fought and died for its possession. But in the history of the 1st Infantry Division, in the Ordnance Department's training programs, and in the example of soldier initiative under fire, Hill 265 remains significant. The 19-year-old farm boy who fixed a jammed machine gun with a pocket knife demonstrated qualities that characterized American soldiers throughout the war: practical intelligence, mechanical aptitude, calm under pressure, and refusal to accept defeat when solutions were possible. James Robert McKinley's story reminds us that military history is not just about generals in grand strategy. It is about individual soldiers solving immediate problems under impossible circumstances. It is about young men, often barely out of high school, who found themselves responsible for weapons they had never seen before entering the military, and who learned those systems well enough to keep them functioning under the worst conditions.